The fluorescent lights hummed their 3 a.m. drone, a sound like electricity leaking through the walls. Oak Creek Memorial's 4th floor existed in that strange suspended moment between night and not quite morning, when the world felt smaller and the silence felt heavier. Ashley Cooper moved through the corridors with the efficiency of someone who had done this before, not the night shift nursing, but the keeping people alive in impossible spaces. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the 4 drip in room 342, the morphine line running clear and steady. She'd learned long ago that the tremor wasn't fear. It was damage. 2 fingers on her left hand didn't respond quite right anymore, the ring finger and pinky curling slightly inward no matter how hard she concentrated. Nerve damage from the IED blast in Helmand Province. The VA had given her a pamphlet about it. She'd thrown it away. Her badge clattered softly against her ribs as she moved to the next room, the motion practiced and silent. Under her scrubs, pressed against her collarbone, hung a single dog tag on a chain that had snapped years ago. The chain had never been replaced. Some breaks, she'd learned, were better left unfixed. They reminded you of things. The tag itself bore a name that wasn't hers anymore, Daniel James Cooper, USMC, and she could feel its weight like a promise she couldn't quite keep. The metal had worn smooth from her fingers, from nights she'd held it while staring at hospital ceilings, wondering how she'd ended up here, changing bedpans and checking vitals like she hadn't once commanded a trauma unit that saved 247 Marines in a place where the dust never settled and the sound of helicopters never quite left your skull. The night shift suited her. Fewer questions. Fewer eyes. Fewer people to remember that she used to be someone else. Room 347 changed that calculation in the moment she saw the admission chart taped to the door. The handwriting belonged to one of the day nurses, precise and clinical, Corporal Marcus Webb, T for spinal injury, paralyzed bilateral legs, transferred from the VA hospital in Durham. Prognosis pending. The words felt flat. Inadequate. Ashley pushed the door open and stepped into a room that smelled like antiseptic and fear. That particular fear that comes from a body that won't do what you tell it to, that's become a stranger wearing your face. Corporal Webb lay motionless in the hospital bed, his upper body rigid with the kind of tension that comes from trying to control something that's already gone. His right forearm was tattooed with the eagle, globe, an anchor of the Marine Corps, and below it, the numerals 2/6, 2nd Battalion, 6th Marines. Ashley's hands shook harder. She made them stop by pressing her palms flat against her thighs. An older woman sat in the vinyl chair beside the bed, rosary beads looped between her fingers, her lips moving in silence. Webb's mother. The way her shoulders curved inward suggested she'd been sitting there for hours, maybe days, accumulating the kind of exhaustion that sleep wouldn't touch. She looked up when Ashley entered, hope and dread warring in her eyes. "Just checking vitals," Ashley said, her voice pitched low and steady. Deferential. The voice she wore for the day shift, the one that sounded like it belonged to a night shift nurse with shaky hands who knew her place. "I'm Ashley. I'll be watching him tonight." The woman nodded, returning to her rosary. Webb's eyes tracked Ashley as she moved to the monitors. His pain was written in the tight muscles of his jaw, in the way he wasn't breathing normally, the shallow, guarded breathing of someone trying to minimize movement. She read his vitals from the screen, blood pressure elevated at 148/91, heart rate running at 96, oxygen saturation holding at 94% on room air. His chart indicated pain management protocol at standard post-operative intervals, morphine for milligrams every 4 hours. Ashley looked at the paralyzed 24-year-old in front of her, thought about what T4 meant, thought about what pain at that level of nerve damage felt like in those first few days, and made a decision that would change everything. She pulled up his chart on the computer terminal and made a notation. Not a suggestion. Not a timid request. A clinical recommendation: consider increased morphine dosing, T for injury with inadequate current pain management. Patient guarding respirations. Risk of pneumonia secondary to shallow breathing patterns. She documented the time, 3:06. She documented her signature, A. Cooper, RN. Then she closed the chart and returned to the bedside. "The pain medication we have orders for," she said quietly to Webb, "it's not matching your injury level. I'm going to talk to the doctor when rounds start. You shouldn't have to white-knuckle through this." Webb's eyes widened slightly. "You think you can change it?" "I think it's what needs to happen," Ashley said. She wasn't thinking about what a night shift nurse with shaky hands was supposed to do. She was thinking about what a major in the United States Marine Corps had learned about triage and pain management and the way agony could spiral into complications if you let it. "Let me worry about the politics." She was adjusting his foot drip when the sound came from across the hall, the particular tone of an alarm that meant something had shifted. Room 344. The patient there was a 78-year-old post-op cardiac with arrhythmia risk. Ashley moved fast. Not running. Running drew attention. But the kind of efficient walk that ate distance, and she was through the door of 344 in under 5 seconds. The patient's monitor showed irregular rhythm, the EKG trace jumping erratically. His eyes were open, confused, and his color had gone the particular shade of gray that meant blood pressure was dropping. Ashley's hands moved on their own, 12 years of muscle memory, 2 tours of Kandahar and Helmand, 1 near-death experience that had almost killed her along with a 45-ton tank that had struck the field hospital, muscle memory that didn't shake. She hit the call button. Grabbed the portable defibrillator from the wall mount. "I need the crash cart," she said to Jenkins, the night tech who'd appeared in the doorway. Her voice had dropped an octave. "Pure command. And get cardiology on the phone. Tell them room 344, likely SVT with rapid ventricular response, patient losing consciousness." Jenkins moved. He didn't question. That was the thing about command voice, people recognized it the way dogs recognize the whistle only they could hear. The cardiac rhythm steadied as she worked, her trembling hands placing electrode pads with the precision of a surgeon. Muscle memory. Pain is information, she'd learned years ago in a tent in Marjah while bullets kept time like a metronome. Every tremor in her hands was telling her something about pressure and placement and the gap between damaged nerves and what needed to happen anyway. The monitor beep resolved into something closer to normal rhythm. Not perfect. Close enough. The patient's eyes found hers and Ashley saw the ancient recognition there, the look someone gives you when you pull them back from a ledge they didn't see they were standing on. "You're all right," she said quietly. "Sinus rhythm. You're back." By the time the day shift arrived at 6:55, the 4th floor had settled back into its hum. Ashley was charting in the break room, her shift technically over, when Dr. Caldwell appeared in the doorway with the morning rounds team. He was tall, probably 45, the kind of handsome that came from knowing he was handsome, the expensive kind of face that had never heard the word no from people who mattered. He was holding her notation from Corporal Webb's chart, the paper folded in his hand like evidence. He didn't say good morning. "Your recommendation for increased pain medication," he said, his voice carrying the particular tone of someone used to being obeyed. "It's not appropriate." Ashley set down her coffee. She could feel the slight tremor in her hands, but she'd learned to hide it by moving slowly. Deliberately. "The patient's injury level indicates." "I'm aware of what the injury indicates," Caldwell said. "What I'm not aware of is what gives a night shift nurse the authority to adjust medical protocols." He tore the notation in half. "The standard post-op pain management is sufficient. Your job is to administer what's ordered, not to second-guess the doctors." He dropped the paper pieces into the trash and turned to leave. Ashley didn't respond. She'd learned that too. The tremor in her hands had nothing to do with fear. And Caldwell had no idea who he was standing next to. He saw a night shift nurse with shaky hands and a broken dog tag chain hidden under her scrubs. He didn't see the surgeon who'd performed emergency thoracotomies in sandstorms under mortar fire, a combat knife steady while the hospital shook around her. He didn't see the major who'd kept people alive in the worst places on earth. He was already turning the corner when Wilson, the security guard, entered the break room carrying his overnight report. Wilson was in his 50s, ex-army, carried himself with the particular ease of someone who'd seen combat and made peace with it. He watched Caldwell disappear down the hallway, then looked at Ashley with something like recognition in his eyes. "That the new doctor?" Wilson asked. "Dr. Caldwell," Ashley said. "Started last month." Wilson picked up the torn pieces of paper from the trash. "Read them." His expression didn't change, but something shifted in how he was looking at her. "You know," he said quietly, "I spent for years in the 82nd Airborne. Long time ago. Got pretty good at noticing when somebody in the room had actually seen something." He set the paper pieces back on the table. "Lot of people wouldn't have moved that fast for a stranger 3 hours ago. Lot of people would have waited for someone else to handle it." Ashley didn't respond. She stood and walked to the window overlooking the parking lot, where the morning was just beginning to crack open the darkness. Her hands rested on the sill, trembling slightly, the dog tag beneath her scrubs pressing against her chest like a secret. "Well," Wilson said, and she heard his footsteps heading toward the door. "Good luck with that." She didn't turn around. Outside, the rain was starting to fall, and somewhere in the hospital, Corporal Marcus Webb was sleeping without adequate pain management because a doctor she'd never heard of 3 weeks ago had decided that her clinical judgment didn't matter. She thought about his mother's face. She thought about the way pain spiraled into complications. She thought about promises she'd made in the dust of Afghanistan to a man whose name was engraved on the dog tag beneath her scrubs. And she thought about what was about to happen when Dr. Caldwell decided to systematically destroy her. 7 in the morning, and the hospital smelled like antiseptic and fresh coffee grounds. Dr. Caldwell led the board through Oak Creek Memorial's third-floor corridor with the measured stride of a man who owned the building, though his name was nowhere on the deed. 4 administrators in press suits followed him like pilot fish trailing a shark. Ashley had her hands on Sergeant Webb's stand when Caldwell stopped at the threshold of room 347, letting the silence accumulate before he spoke. "Nurse Cooper, did you alter this patient's pain protocol without consulting me?" She turned from the monitor where she'd been adjusting the morphine drip. Webb lay motionless beneath the sheets, his shattered spine making him a prisoner of his own body. His mother sat in the corner chair, eyes red-rimmed, hands trembling worse than Ashley's. "The patient was suffering, doctor." Ashley's voice came out level, professional. His vitals indicated he needed. "I don't recall asking for a diagnosis from the bedpan brigade." One of the board members, a woman in a burgundy blazer, shifted her weight. Webb's mother gasped, a sound like something breaking. Ashley took one measured breath through her nose. A single tear slid down her left cheek. She didn't look away from Caldwell. She didn't blink. She wiped the tear without breaking eye contact, and when her hand came down, her voice was steady as surgical steel. "I documented my clinical observations per protocol, doctor." Caldwell leaned in, his face close enough that Ashley could see the broken capillaries around his nose. "You're a nurse. You observe. I decide." He straightened, turning to address the board as if she'd already stopped existing. "This is what happens when we lower our hiring standards. They get ideas. They start to think they're physicians." He smiled, the kind of smile that arrives before the knife. "We'll be implementing a new disciplinary framework for unauthorized protocol changes. Starting immediately." He left. The board flowed out behind him like water seeking the lowest point. Webb's mother was crying openly now. "Thank you," she whispered. "He was in so much pain last night. Thank you for—" "I need to get back," Ashley said. She didn't look at the woman. If she did, she might break something in herself that couldn't be repaired. The break room at noon was a study in social physics. Ashley sat at a corner table with her lunch, a container of leftover rice and grilled chicken, something she'd prepared at 3 a.m. while staring at the dog tag chain around her neck. Chen, a second-year resident who usually traded jokes with everyone, started toward her with his coffee. Then he saw Caldwell watching through the break room's glass window, standing in the hallway like a hunter checking his traps. Chen pivoted mid-stride, took his coffee to go. 3 nurses at the adjacent table suddenly remembered appointments. One of them was mid-sentence, something about her daughter's soccer tournament, when Ashley made eye contact. She grabbed her purse. They left. The room was full of people, and Ashley was eating alone in the middle of it. She didn't look down. She kept her eyes on the television mounted in the corner, where a local news anchor was reciting a story about a fire downtown. Her left hand trembled slightly around the plastic fork. The dog tag beneath her scrubs moved with her breathing, the broken chain clicking once against her sternum, then settling back into silence. By 4 in the afternoon, the written reprimand appeared on the unit board outside the nurse's station. Caldwell timed it perfectly: shift change, maximum visibility. The header was in bold block letters: disciplinary action, A. Cooper, failure to respect chain of command. The body text outlined her unauthorized medication protocol changes and her failure to defer clinical decisions to attending physicians. Ashley stood in front of it for 30 seconds. Her hands began to shake, not from fear, but from the effort of restraint. The clipboard she was holding rattled against her leg. She could feel the entire floor watching her. 2 of the nurses pretended to be checking the supply closet. A tech stopped charting and stared. Caldwell stood 15 feet away, pretending to review something on his phone, except his eyes kept flicking toward her. She pulled the board away from the wall and walked to the nearest trash bin. She didn't look at Caldwell. She didn't acknowledge the sudden hush that descended on the unit. She simply took the write-up off the board, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it away. Then she went back to work. That evening, Caldwell came into Webb's room while Ashley was helping him with the passive range of motion exercises his paralyzed body desperately needed. His right leg, limp as a sandbag, lay across her forearm. She was moving it slowly, methodically, her hand steady. "Nurse Cooper, a word. Now." It wasn't a request. It was a command issued in front of Webb and his mother, designed to humiliate with maximum efficiency. Ashley settled Webb's leg gently back onto the bed. "I'll be right back," she told him. She didn't say it to Caldwell. She stepped into the hallway, and Caldwell followed, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and aggressively masculine, like he'd weaponized a Saks Fifth Avenue counter. "Your hero complex is noted and unwelcome," he said quietly, which made it worse than if he'd shouted. "This Marine doesn't need a washed-up Florence Nightingale playing doctor. He needs a nurse who knows her limitations." Behind them, through the open door, Webb's mother started crying. Ashley could hear her trying to stifle the sound. Something in Ashley's chest tightened, and for one moment, her composure fractured. One tear ran down her face. She wiped it away with the back of her hand, and when she spoke, her voice had dropped an octave. It carried the weight of authority that had no right to exist in a hospital corridor, but it was there anyway. "Sir, I've been fired by better men than you." Caldwell's smile could have cut glass. "Not fired. Yet. But we'll get there, Coop." He turned and walked away, his footsteps clicking on the tile with the confidence of a man who had never once considered he might lose. In the parking lot, at the end of her shift, Ashley's hand shook so badly she couldn't unlock her car. She stood there for 10 minutes with her keys dangling, staring at the dark windows of her Toyota, and tried to remember the breathing techniques she'd learned in the field hospital, the ones used for managing pain when the morphine ran out. In through the nose. Hold. Out through the mouth. The September rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, drumming against the asphalt with a sound like distant applause. She got in the car. She didn't start the engine. She just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, watching the rain stream down the windshield, and she didn't cry because crying wasn't something she'd done in 14 years. Over the next week, Caldwell's campaign shifted from theatrical humiliation to systematic sabotage. The scheduling office called Ashley on a Tuesday morning to inform her that she'd been reassigned to pediatrics, the understaffed wing on the 4th floor where patient loads were chaotic and the staffing ratios were non-existent. Not rotated. Reassigned. When she requested the change be reversed, the administrator, who played golf with Caldwell every Saturday, explained that his hands were tied. Budgets. Staffing requirements. Board recommendations. Triple shifts. 18 hours at a time. The kind of rotation designed to wear someone down until they made mistakes. By day 3, her access code to the medication dispensary had been deactivated. Every routine medication now required a supervisor's override, adding 15 minutes to every task. Patients waited. Families complained. The complaints went into her file with the precision of a man building a case. But the worst was the night she found the pleural effusion in Webb's X-ray. She was working a pediatrics rotation when she stole 30 minutes and logged into the hospital system from a break room terminal. Webb's file was still in her recent history. She pulled up his latest chest imaging and saw it immediately, the subtle cloudiness along his left lung base that no one else had flagged. Fluid building in his pleural space. The kind of thing that could become a pneumothorax if no one caught it. The kind of thing that would kill him. She typed a clinical note documenting her findings, flagged it urgent, and went back to work. Morning rounds found her in the pediatric medication dispensary when her phone rang. Unknown number. "Ashley, don't hang up," Chen's voice came through, urgent and quiet. "Caldwell deleted your note. He pulled it from the digital record 10 minutes after you posted it. Then he called a meeting with the board. I don't know the details, but he's talking about your continued employment." She didn't respond immediately. Through the dispensary window, she could see the hospital hallway continuing on indefinitely, full of fluorescent light and the distant beep of monitors. "There's more," Chen continued. "He went to Reeves about you. About your tendency to overstep. Reeves said he'd talk to you, but between us, Reeves isn't going to fight him. He's too close to retirement." After Chen hung up, Ashley walked directly to Caldwell's office. The door was closed, so she knocked. Professional. Controlled. Everything a nurse should be. Caldwell looked up from his desk with an expression of theatrical surprise. "Nurse Cooper. Unusual to see you here. Everything all right?" "The patient in room 347 has developing pleural effusion. His respiratory status is declining. He needs imaging follow-up and possibly. You're not assigned to that patient anymore." Caldwell's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Stay away from room 347 or I'll have security remove you from the building. Am I clear?" "Doctor, he has fluid building in his." "Clear." She left. She walked straight to the chief of medicine's office on the second floor. Dr. Reeves was a man in his 60s with the kind of tired eyes that come from too many years of politics. When Ashley explained the situation, explained Webb's condition, explained the implications of the deleted note, Reeves listened with his hands folded on his desk. "Ashley, sometimes the best patient care means respecting the hierarchy," he said gently. "Dr. Caldwell is very protective of his service lines. And between you and me, I'm retiring in 18 months. I can't afford to make enemies on the board." She drove home that evening and slept without dreaming. She woke at midnight with her heart racing, went to the kitchen, stared at a glass of water for 40 minutes without drinking it. The text came at 2:33 a.m., Friday night. Unknown number, web crashing. ICU. You didn't hear this from me. Ashley was in the parking lot in 40 seconds. Her hands didn't shake. Her breathing didn't accelerate. Her eyes didn't burn with tears. She drove through empty Raleigh streets like a woman walking through water, each movement deliberate, each thought crystalline. The dog tag beneath her scrubs had stopped moving. It hung there, inert, waiting. She'd promised Daniel she would leave it behind. Leave the person she'd been behind. Leave the field hospital and the blood and the decisions that killed some people and saved others behind. She'd promised. And she was about to break every promise she'd ever made. The pediatric wing of Oak Creek Memorial smelled like cough syrup and desperation. Ashley learned this at 2:27 a.m. when she clocked in to find her timecard reassigned, her name printed under the chronically understaffed unit where children's monitors beeped like a metronome of chaos, where call lights never stopped flashing, where the nurse-to-patient ratio was less a guideline and more a statistical fiction. She stood in the break room holding the reassignment notice, printed on Caldwell's personal letterhead, dated the day after her clinical recommendation. Not a conversation. Not a discussion. Just a reassignment that effectively removed her from the ICU, from Webb, from the only floor where her expertise mattered. She didn't flinch. Not outwardly. The trembling she'd trained out of her hands 2 decades ago tried to return, but Ashley pressed her palms flat against the cool laminate counter and breathed through it. This was tactical. Caldwell wanted her isolated, exhausted, invisible. He was using institutional structure the way he would use a scalpel, methodically, precisely, without passion. Almost professional. Almost. The schedule restructure came 3 days later. Her shifts became triple rotations that bled into one another like watercolor nightmares. Wednesday night became Thursday night became Friday afternoon, 72 hours compressed into a haze where her body forgot what sleep felt like and her mind learned to operate on fumes and muscle memory. She saw the pattern immediately. Caldwell had arranged it so she'd work when the full-time staff clocked out, when the part-timers were gone, when she'd be isolated in a wing where nobody knew her, where she had no allies, where exhaustion would be her only company. The scheduling system showed her availability listed differently now, locked in by someone with administrative access she didn't have. By the second week, she discovered she'd been removed from the unit email chain. The morning huddle meetings that happened at 6:15 a.m., the ones where treatment plans were discussed and cases were reviewed, the meetings where information lived, she wasn't invited. She found out by overhearing 2 nurses from the day's shift in the supply closet, their voices dropping when they noticed her standing in the doorway, suddenly remembering they had somewhere else to be. "He said you were reassigned," one of them offered, not meeting her eyes. "The huddles are just for active ICU staff." Ashley nodded and left without responding. No questions. No defensiveness. Just the quiet acknowledgement of someone who understood how institutional warfare actually worked. But that wasn't the worst part. The documentation started appearing like breadcrumbs leading to a predetermined destination. Caldwell had begun what nurses called a paper trail, a systematic record of minor charting variations, deviations from protocol that existed in every nurse's work but which he was isolating, highlighting, photographing, and filing. A note recorded at 2:14 instead of 2:10. A vital sign documented in the wrong sequence. A medication administration time that was 30 seconds delayed because the 4 had briefly occluded. Nothing serious. Nothing patient endangering. Everything legal. Everything carefully constructed to look like incompetence. The hospital's disciplinary officer, a woman named Margaret Chen who'd worked at Oak Creek for 17 years, showed Ashley the folder one afternoon. 7 pages of documented protocol violations. Chen's expression was apologetic and powerless simultaneously. "He's building something," Chen said quietly, closing the folder. "I don't know what yet, but he's building it carefully." Ashley read the dates. 3 violations in the first 2 weeks. 4 in the third. 5 in the fourth. An escalating pattern that a lawyer, or a judge, would see as evidence of systematic failure. She understood. Caldwell wasn't just removing her from proximity to Webb. He was constructing a narrative where her removal would seem inevitable, justified, inevitable seeming. The real leverage came during daytime rounds, when Caldwell positioned himself directly in her path, making himself unavoidable. He'd observe her while she changed a dressing, waited until she was explaining post-operative care to a patient's family, then interrupt with corrections that were often pedantic, sometimes irrelevant, always delivered with a smile that made the patient's confidence in her crumble like dry paper. "Actually, Nurse Cooper, we used the 2.0 gauge needle for that particular wound bed, not 1.8, he said, loud enough for the patient's daughter to hear. "Hospital standard. I understand the ICU does things differently, but here we maintain protocol." The 1.8 gauge was technically more appropriate for a pediatric patient with fragile skin. Ashley knew this. The patient's daughter didn't. By the time Caldwell left, he'd established himself as the authority, the correct one, the detail-oriented physician, while Ashley had become the nurse who cut corners. It happened again with a medication reconciliation. again with a catheter placement where Caldwell stood over her shoulder, watching, making her aware of his presence with breathing that sounded like judgment. "You're repositioning from the left side," he observed, not as a question. "Interesting choice. The patient has a thrombus on the right side. Ultrasound report from Monday." "Ah. I see. Well, perhaps you should reference the current chart more carefully before making these decisions. It's been resolved as of this morning." It hadn't been. Ashley checked later. But doubt had been planted, and doubt was Caldwell's real weapon. He was turning her colleagues' eyes away from her competence and toward her supposed negligence. He was making them question her. Making her own hands feel less sure. By day 23 of the reassignment, Ashley worked a 72-hour stretch in the pediatric wing where a 6-year-old with asthma coded at 3:34 a.m. She was the only RN on the floor. The nearest help was 5 minutes away. She intubated the girl using a size 4.0 endotracheal tube, got her oxygenating in 90 seconds, had her on a ventilator by the time the respiratory therapist arrived. The child lived. The child lived because Ashley knew her way around an emergency, because her hands worked despite the exhaustion, because muscle memory from 2 decades of trauma work didn't fade just because a bitter administrator wanted it to. Nobody thanked her. Nobody mentioned it. The next morning's charting came back with 3 new violations highlighted in yellow: late documentation, slightly irregular spacing on the flow sheet, a narrative note that was 10 minutes delayed. She'd stopped looking at the messages from her colleagues. The pediatric staff didn't include her in their conversations anymore. The full-time ICU nurses she'd worked beside for 3 years suddenly had other patients to see when she entered a room. The fracture had been deliberate, surgical, complete. Then came the text at 4:17 p.m. on a Thursday, from an unknown number, web crashing ICU. Pneumothorax. Caldwell ordering no intervention until you clear area. He's killing him. Ashley sat in the break room of the pediatric wing, looking at this message, understanding exactly what it meant. Caldwell had kept her from the ICU. Caldwell had isolated her. Caldwell had systematically dismantled her professional credibility so thoroughly that when he finally made a move against Webb, she wouldn't be believed if she claimed Caldwell was actively sabotaging care. And now Webb was dying, and Caldwell was making sure nobody would suspect sabotage because the nurse who would have caught it first had been removed from the board entirely. She clocked out at 4:23 p.m. Her assignment on the pediatric wing could wait. The staffing shortage there had never been her responsibility, and it wasn't going to become one now. The stairwell doors opened and she started running. The intercom crackled at 2:11 p.m. Code Blue, ICU, Bay 7. Dr. Caldwell requested immediately. Ashley was 8 floors below, finishing a pediatric handoff in the orthopedic wing. A 7-year-old with a compound fracture, cast still drying, mother asking questions about physical therapy. Ashley answered each one with the patience that had become her armor, the quiet, efficient nurse who never overstepped, never questioned authority, never looked anyone in the eye long enough to be remembered. The intercom crackled again. Repeat code Blue, ICU, Bay 7. All available personnel. She knew. Somehow she knew before her conscious mind caught up to her body. Webb. The paralyzed Marine. The reason Caldwell had systematically destroyed her access to patient care. The one she'd been ordered to ignore. Ashley placed a gentle hand on the mother's shoulder. Your son's doing beautifully. The orthopedic team will take it from here. She moved before the woman could respond. Not running, not yet. Just walking with purpose toward the stairwell. The fluorescent lights hummed their artificial drone above her head. Her shoes made soft sounds on the linoleum. Click, click, click. Measured. Professional. A nurse following protocol. The stairwell doors burst open. Then she ran. 8 flights. Muscle memory from a field hospital in Marjah where running meant the difference between breathing and bleeding out. Her legs found their rhythm without permission from her exhausted mind. The dog tag beneath her scrubs bounced against her ribs with each impact. 2 steps at a time. 3 on the straightaways. The metal railing cold beneath her palm as she whipped around each landing. ICU doors. She slammed through them at 2:51 p.m. Security tried to intercept her. A guard named Rodriguez, who'd always been polite, always held doors, always looked uncomfortable with Caldwell's orders. She didn't slow down. Didn't acknowledge him. Just moved past like he was furniture. He didn't grab her. Something in the way she moved told him not to. Bay 7. She saw him first, Webb, skin the color of wet concrete, mouth open and gasping like a landed fish. The ventilator screaming its mechanical alarm. His eyes were rolling, unfocused, drowning in air. The right side of his chest wasn't moving with the left. Asymmetrical breathing. Collapsed lung. A delayed pneumothorax, the kind that kills you quietly, hours after the initial injury, when everyone thinks the crisis has passed. Dr. Caldwell stood 3 feet from the bedside, holding a chest tube kit with trembling hands. The scalpel clattered against the metal tray. His fingers wouldn't cooperate. 2 residents scrambled around him, lost, waiting for orders that weren't coming. A respiratory therapist adjusted the ventilator settings, going through the motions, buying time, hoping something would change without intervention. Ashley assessed the situation in 3 seconds. O2 sat 54% and dropping. Heart rate 148, arrhythmic. JVD distended. Trachea shifting right. Tension pneumothorax. If Caldwell got the tube in, he'd push more air into the space, collapse the other lung, trigger a cardiac tamponade. The man didn't have the steadiness to cannulate. His hands were shaking so badly he'd perforate the lung itself. Webb was going to die watching his doctor fail him. Ashley moved to the bedside without asking permission. Without speaking. Without hesitation. The residents parted instinctively, exhaustion and fear creating a vacuum that her presence filled with something that felt like certainty. "Step back," she said. Quiet. Final. Not a request. Caldwell turned toward her, indignation flashing across his face. You have no authority." She took the scalpel from his hands. His fingers released it without resistance, too shocked to comply with his own will. The blade was surgical steel, cool and sharp. She'd held scalpels like this in a trauma bay in Helmand Province, with mortars walking rounds across the compound and blood that wasn't coming off her hands for 3 days afterward. 14-gauge needle decompression, she said to the respiratory therapist. Second intercostal, mid-clavicular. Her hands moved. Not trembling. Not hesitating. The muscle memory that Caldwell had spent 2 weeks trying to destroy came back the moment she needed it most. She swabbed the second intercostal space with chlorhexidine, felt the anatomy beneath her fingers like reading braille, found the exact point where sternum met ribs. The scalpel cut clean, a small incision, precise, no wasted motion. The hiss came immediately. Air escaping. Pressure releasing. Webb's oxygen sac climbed. 54 to 62. 62 to 74. 74 to 88. His color shifted from concrete to something closer to human. His eyes focused. The ventilator alarm changed pitch as his lungs expanded symmetrically again. Sinus rhythm. Stable. She didn't step back. Didn't celebrate. Didn't even look at Caldwell. She kept her hand on Webb's chest, feeling his respirations, counting them, making sure the improvement was real. The security guards appeared in the doorway at 2:54 p.m. "You need to come with us." She turned to them, still touching the Marine's chest. Still calm. Still present. He's stable. Get a trauma surgeon to evaluate for delayed complications. Watch for bilateral breath sounds. If either side becomes diminished, call me before you call anyone else. Rodriguez stepped forward. He looked ashamed. I know, she said. It's not your job to question orders. She removed her hand from Webb's chest slowly, deliberately. Gave him one final look. His eyes were tracking her now, fully conscious, pupils equal and reactive. In those eyes she saw recognition, not of who she was, but of what she was. Someone who'd been trained to save lives in places where death arrived on the wind and stayed for months. Then Caldwell appeared between her and the bed, his chest puffed with the fragile bravado of a man desperate to reclaim authority. His hands were still shaking. His white coat was immaculate. His face was the color of spoiled milk. "You performed an unauthorized procedure," he said. "You violated direct orders." "You?" "I heard a Marine was crashing," Ashley said. "I responded." "You abandoned your assigned station." "You?" "The Marine is alive, Doctor." The words hung in the air like a blade between them. Caldwell's mouth opened and closed. Behind him, the residents were staring at their shoes. The respiratory therapist had turned away. In the doorway, Rodriguez looked like he might salute but didn't. Ashley turned to the security guards. "I'm ready." They escorted her out with the gentleness of men who'd just watched someone save a life their superiors had been about to lose. Neither of them was rough. Neither spoke. One of them was crying, she thought, though she didn't turn to look. As she passed Webb's bedside, his eyes found hers one more time. His mouth moved. No sound came out. But she saw it anyway, the recognition that had been building in his body since she'd touched his scarred chest. His eyes dropped to her forearms, exposed where she'd rolled up her sleeves for the procedure. The scar pattern was unmistakable. Shrapnel marks in a specific configuration. The signature of an IED fragmentation pattern. The exact same pattern that had torn through her own arms 8 years ago in Marjah, in the field hospital tent where Marcus Webb had been the junior combat medic and Ashley had been the major trying to save 247 Marines with 2 hands that would never work quite right again. His body went rigid. His eyes widened. She didn't look back. Security was moving her toward the elevators now, the corridor stretching like a throat. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Behind her, she heard the ventilator settling into its steady rhythm. Heard Webb's monitor beeping, slow, steady, alive. That was the last thing she heard from him. Just a number on a machine, proof of survival. The elevator doors closed. Security stood on either side of her like pallbearers. The numbers descended, 4, 3, 2, 1. The lobby doors opened onto afternoon light that felt like it was coming from another planet. At 3:42 p.m., the hospital administrator called her into his office and terminated her employment, citing liability concerns and unauthorized medical procedures. He read from talking points Caldwell had prepared, his voice the flat monotone of a man who'd already made his choice before the meeting began. At 5:15 p.m., Caldwell filed a formal complaint with the North Carolina Board of Nursing, requesting suspension of Ashley's license pending investigation into reckless endangerment and violation of scope of practice. At 6:27 p.m., as rain began falling on Raleigh in heavy sheets, Ashley cleared her locker in silence. Her civilian jacket. Her spare shoes. The single dog tag on its broken chain, the silver edges worn smooth from 8 years of being held in tight fists. The chain tangled as she pulled it out. The tag caught on her scrubs. For a moment she was stuck, military to civilian, past to present, the woman she'd been to the woman she'd tried to become. She worked it free carefully, like it was made of crystal instead of metal. The locker door closed with a metallic click. Then she drove to Raleigh Memorial Gardens, Section 14, Row 7, where Daniel Cooper's headstone sat beneath an oak tree that had grown 3 feet taller since the last time she'd visited. The rain was cold. The mud beneath the grass was soft enough to kneel in without resistance. She knelt there for 40 minutes. The dog tag was still in her hand, clenched so hard the broken chain cut into her palm. Thin lines of blood mixed with rainwater, dripping onto white marble. "I tried to leave it behind like you made me promise," she whispered. "After the IED took your life, after it took my hands, I promised I'd build a quiet life. You made me swear I'd stop being a soldier. Stop being Major Cooper. Just be Ashley. Just be normal. And I tried, Daniel. God knows I tried for 8 years. She pressed the dog tag to her forehead. Rain ran down her face. Her voice didn't crack. Her hands didn't shake. But her breath came in hard, controlled pulls, like someone who'd learned long ago that breaking down wasn't an option, even alone in the dark. But I saw that Marine dying, and I couldn't stand back. I'm not built for standing back. You knew that when you married me. You knew it when you left. And now I've got nothing left. No job. No license. Nothing but this broken chain and a promise I broke. She stayed there as the rain fell harder. As the sky turned from grey to black. As her clothes soaked through and the cold penetrated down to bone. No one was watching. No one would report her for crying. But she didn't cry anyway. Just knelt. Just held the dog tag. Just kept breathing. A figure emerged from the tree line at 7:50 p.m. Dress blues. Lance Corporal insignia. Sarah Webb, Marcus Webb's daughter, who'd been discharged from active duty 6 months ago and had followed Ashley from the hospital parking lot because her father had called her from recovery and said 3 words, "She's still here." Sarah waited until Ashley finally stood. Waited until the older woman turned. Waited until their eyes met across the rain-soaked grass. Sarah said, "I need you to know something." Ashley said nothing. Just waited. "My father made a call to Camp Lejeune before surgery. Before they took him up to the ICU. He recognized you. Your scars. Your face. And he told them to find you. He told them where you were." "Sarah," Ashley started. "They've been looking for you for 3 years," Sarah continued. "Ever since you stopped showing up for your classified consultations. The Pentagon has been looking for you. And my father just gave them exactly where to find you." Behind her car, a sedan pulled up through the cemetery gates. Its headlights cut through the rain. Sarah raised her hand. The headlights blinked twice in acknowledgement. "They're coming to the hospital tomorrow morning," Sarah said. "They're bringing Colonel Clayton from the Marine Corps Expeditionary Force. General Patterson might come himself. And they're bringing a job offer that my father says you can't refuse." Ashley's world tilted on its axis. 8 years of hiding. 8 years of being just a nurse. 8 years of keeping the dog tag hidden and the rank buried and the memories locked in the deepest vault of her mind. How? Ashley started. "Why?" "Because," Sarah said, "my father remembered. And because you save lives, And the Pentagon decided it's time you stopped wasting them." Security guards entered the ICU bay before Marcus Webb's chest even stopped moving. Ashley didn't resist. She set down the surgical tray, stepped back with her hands visible, and met Caldwell's eyes for exactly 1 second. That was all it took. She didn't need to say anything. Her hands had just saved a life while his trembled holding the chest tube kit. Caldwell turned away first, his jaw clenched so tight you could see the muscle working beneath his skin. By 7 p.m. that night, Caldwell had filed a formal complaint with the North Carolina Board of Nursing alleging unauthorized medical procedure performed by unlicensed surgical personnel. By 8 p.m., he'd convened an emergency board meeting in the hospital administrator's office. 3 board members sat around the mahogany table, the same men who'd smiled when Caldwell publicly corrected Ashley in the hallway, the same men who'd approved his staffing decisions without question. The hospital's liability insurance carrier was on speakerphone, and her voice came through sharp and cold. "This is significant exposure." Significant? A terminated employee performing an emergency surgical procedure? That's either heroic or reckless, and right now, on paper, it looks reckless because Dr. Caldwell initiated the termination 48 minutes before the crisis occurred. Caldwell leaned forward. "I made the right call." She was insubordinate. She questioned my medical judgment in front of the board. The board chair, a man named Sterling who'd golfed with Caldwell 3 weeks prior, shifted uncomfortably. The question is whether we can defend the termination if it comes out that she saved the Marine's life. She performed a procedure outside her scope of practice, Caldwell said. His voice had the confidence of someone who'd never been questioned successfully. That's the story. Not the outcome. The procedure. But the insurance carrier wasn't finished. Doctor, did you restrict her access to the patient's care? Silence. Did you reassign her to another floor? Another silence, longer this time. And then, 2 days later, she was somehow in the ICU during a critical moment. The insurance carrier's tone shifted. It sounded like the voice of someone reading a liability lawsuit out loud. That's not a procedure question anymore. That's a retaliation question. Caldwell's hands clenched on the table. I don't appreciate. Dr. Caldwell, Sterling interrupted, and his voice had changed too. We need to discuss your future with this institution. By the next morning, Caldwell had hired a lawyer. By evening, he decided his best move was a fence. He called WIL News at 2 p.m. and offered himself for an exclusive interview at 6 p.m. He'd framed the narrative before anyone else could. Professional standards. Chain of command. Safety protocols. He'd be the guardian of institutional integrity, and Ashley Cooper would be the cautionary tale about what happens when floor nurses forget their place. The camera loved him. Or the camera loved what he'd rehearsed, his expression of concerned authority, his careful articulation about maintaining professional standards in an increasingly litigious healthcare environment, his well-practiced line about unqualified staff endangering patients through unauthorized procedures. He sat in his white coat with his name embroidered in blue script, and he looked exactly like what he was, a man accustomed to being believed. The anchor asked leading questions that Caldwell had essentially written for her. Doctor, what goes through your mind when you see a nurse step outside her scope of practice? Fear, Caldwell said. Fear for patients. Fear for the institution. You have protocols for a reason. When someone ignores them, regardless of the outcome, you have to take action. Even if the outcome was positive. Especially then. Because that's when people rationalize the behavior. That's how standards deteriorate. He was good. He was so good that half of Raleigh probably believed him by 6:11 p.m., which was exactly when General Thomas Patterson's office called the hospital administrator directly. Not a text. Not an email. A direct phone call to the main line routed immediately to administration because a general commanding Camp Lejeune doesn't wait for callbacks. The administrator was in his car when his phone rang. He pulled over. What the general said took approximately 90 seconds. What the general did took approximately 4 minutes. He called WIL's newsroom directly and told them the Pentagon had a statement regarding their 6 p.m. broadcast. Breaking news. The kind that makes news directors cut to live feed immediately because you don't ignore the Pentagon. The anchor was in the middle of Caldwell's carefully constructed narrative when the studio manager slipped a note across her desk. Her eyes widened. She turned to camera, and Caldwell's face, still composed, still confident, began to collapse microscopically. The tremor of a man whose ground had just shifted. We have a breaking statement from General Thomas Patterson at Camp Lejeune regarding tonight's interview. The general's voice came through the broadcast feed, crisp and precise like a blade. I'm calling regarding Major Ashley Cooper, the nurse Dr. Caldwell just described on this broadcast. Major Cooper is a decorated combat veteran who served as commander of trauma operations at Forward Operating Base Marjah, where she led a team that saved 247 Marines during active operations. She received the Bronze Star with Valor for her actions under fire. She received 2 Purple Hearts for wounds sustained in service. Dr. Caldwell just spent 7 minutes describing her as unqualified on live television. He is wrong. The camera caught Caldwell's face. The confidence hadn't just cracked. It had shattered. His jaw went slack. His hands, which had been folded so precisely on the desk, began to tremble. Major Cooper was medically retired after an IED explosion damaged the median and ulnar nerves in both hands. She was decorated for Valor despite knowing her hands would never be steady again. despite knowing she would spend the rest of her life managing nerve pain that most people can't imagine. She took a civilian job as a nurse because she made a personal commitment to leave military service behind. What Dr. Caldwell doesn't understand is that Major Cooper's unauthorized procedure tonight was a field thoracotomy, a technique she performed hundreds of times in combat. She didn't break protocol. She exceeded it. She saved Sergeant Webb's life while Dr. Caldwell stood frozen, and then he called security to have her removed from the hospital. Caldwell stood up. The camera was still rolling. Furthermore, the Department of Defense has been seeking Major Cooper for the past 18 months to lead a new civilian-military trauma integration program. We've been looking for someone who understands both worlds, military precision and civilian care standards. Someone who knows what it costs to choose people over protocol. Apparently, Dr. Caldwell has been making our recruiting job easier by ensuring she'd be available. Thank you, Doctor. Major Cooper, we'll see you at Camp Lejeune. The feed cut. The anchor turned back to the studio, her expression caught between shock and barely suppressed satisfaction. Caldwell was still standing, his mouth open, when his phone began ringing. And ringing. And ringing. By midnight, his phone had been called 143 times. The hospital's phone had been called 847 times. The hashtag #Justice for Major Cooper was trending nationally with 4.2 million posts. Veterans organizations were mobilizing. A retired 4-star admiral had tweeted, "This is what institutional cowardice looks like. This is what happens when men prioritize hierarchy over heroism." News outlets that had carried his interview were issuing corrections and apologies. The hospital's Facebook page was flooded with 1-star reviews. A Change.org petition demanding his termination had reached 87,000 signatures in 90 minutes. By 8 a.m. the next morning, Caldwell was sitting across from 3 board members who were no longer his allies. Sterling, the board chair, didn't make eye contact. "We've received legal counsel regarding your continued employment. You're not going to stand by me." Caldwell's voice had the quality of something breaking. "You went on live television and smeared a decorated veteran. A Marine. You called her unqualified minutes after she performed a procedure that saved a patient's life. Our liability carrier is recommending immediate termination. Our ethics committee has voted unanimously for your resignation, effective immediately. We will not be contesting your departure. In fact, we're going to announce that we initiated the separation. I saved this hospital. I brought revenue. You brought liability," Sterling said flatly. "You brought a lawsuit waiting to happen. You brought a PR disaster that's going to cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage control. And you did it because you couldn't accept being questioned by a nurse. So here's what's going to happen: you will resign today. You will sign a non-disparagement agreement. You will never work in North Carolina healthcare again. And you will be very quiet about all of it." Caldwell's hand shook as he signed. This time, no one was watching his composure. This time, his trembling was real. 3 days later, the state nursing board dismissed his complaint against Ashley with prejudice. The hearing lasted 17 minutes. A medical review board from Camp Lejeune presented documentation of Ashley's combat medical certifications. Sergeant Webb testified via video from his hospital bed about watching her perform a procedure that kept him alive while Caldwell froze. His daughter, Sarah, testified in uniform about her father's recovery and about watching a military hero get destroyed by a man who'd never faced anything harder than a complaint form. The board chair apologized to Ashley personally. "This complaint was malicious and without merit. We're placing a note in Dr. Caldwell's file recommending investigation into abuse of the complaint system." By week 2, Caldwell had been rejected by 17 hospitals. By week 3, his medical malpractice insurance had been cancelled. By week 4, he'd been convicted of nothing but had lost everything: his reputation, his position, his future in medicine. A man who'd built his entire identity on institutional authority had discovered that institutions abandon you the moment you become a liability. 2 weeks after the Pentagon's call, Ashley sat in General Patterson's office at Camp Lejeune. The general was older than she expected, grey threading through his hair, the kind of presence that came from making decisions that cost lives. "Major Cooper, I won't insult you with ceremony. We need someone who understands both worlds. Someone who knows what it costs. Someone who can teach a generation of combat medics that compassion isn't weakness." Ashley touched the dog tag beneath her collar, Daniel's dog tag, still on its broken chain. "General, I made a promise to my husband to step away from this. To be civilian. To be normal." Patterson leaned back. "You made a promise to him. But you also made a promise when you accepted your commission. To serve, to lead, to honor the Marines you trained. Which promise matters more?" Ashley looked at the dog tag in her hand. She could almost hear Daniel's voice, "Don't hide from who you are. Don't waste it." She picked up the program proposal in front of her. Integrated combat medics and civilian trauma nurses. A new model. A chance to change how military and civilian medicine talk to each other. A chance to make sure no other Marine had to lie paralyzed while a doctor protected his ego instead of his patient. She signed. 6 months later, the night shift at Oak Creek Memorial continued exactly as it always had, monitors beeping, ventilators wheezing, the endless rhythm of a hospital that never closed. But the hallway on the 4th floor had changed. There was a wall of honor now, added by the new administration to celebrate staff achievements. One photo dominated the wall, a woman in dress blues, bronze star, and purple heart ribbon sharp against navy fabric. Major Ashley Cooper. Founder, Pentagon Trauma Integration Program. A man in a security guard uniform mopped the hallway beneath that photo. He was there every night now, pushing the mop with mechanical efficiency, not looking up when staff passed. His name tag read Caldwell. His hand shook slightly as he worked. A nerve damage? No one asked. No one cared enough to ask. He'd become invisible, which was perhaps crueler than being seen. He'd become a cautionary tale that people avoided looking at directly. Ashley walked past him at 2,300 hours, on her way to visit Webb in outpatient rehabilitation. Caldwell's mop stopped moving for a moment. He could have said something. Could have tried to explain. Could have begged. Instead, he looked down at the floor and kept cleaning. Ashley didn't acknowledge him either. She simply walked past, her uniform crisp, her hand still trembling slightly as they gripped Webb's chart, hands that no longer hid their tremor, hands that had earned the right to shake. 6 months after that, Ashley stood at a podium at Camp Lejeune in front of 200 incoming combat medics and civilian trauma nurses. The first class of her integration program. She wore her dress blues for the first time in 8 years, and the weight of the uniform felt right now, not like a burden she'd abandoned, but like a promise she'd finally kept. "Some of you will face impossible choices in impossible situations," she said, her voice steady and low. "You'll have superiors who don't understand. You'll have moments where following orders means watching someone die. And you'll have to decide who you are, the person who accepts hierarchy or the person who saves lives." Webb sat in the front row in his wheelchair, walking braces visible where his legs had begun to respond to treatment. His mother was beside him, and Sarah in uniform on his other side. They were watching someone they'd known as a victim transform into a leader. "The quietest person in the room might be holding it all together," Ashley said. "They might be carrying wounds you can't see, fighting battles you'll never know about. And when you underestimate them, when you humiliate them, when you try to break them, you might discover that the person you dismissed is the only one strong enough to save you." The room went dead silent. 200 future trauma providers understanding in that moment that heroism wasn't about titles or authority. It was about the person who kept working when the world wanted them to quit. On her desk at the Pentagon, Ashley kept Daniel's dog tag now in a frame. Not hidden beneath her scrubs. Not clutched in her fist at midnight. Displayed. A kept promise. The promise to keep saving lives, to keep being who she was, to never hide again. Back at Oak Creek Memorial, Caldwell's mop continued its mechanical rhythm. The wall of honor hung above him, A nightly reminder of what happens when you mistake authority for respect, when you confuse obedience with competence, when you try to destroy someone stronger than yourself. The hospital was already talking about recruiting more veterans to nursing. Already talking about implementing Ashley's protocols. Already talking about everything except the man mopping their floors. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your value, subscribe now. Like this video if you believe that true strength is quiet. And comment, what would you have done in Ashley's position? Would you have walked away from the military life, or would you have found a way back to it? Let's talk about it.